is Dallas Blaney. I'm the CEO at CORE, the Community Office for Resource Efficiency. What we're here to talk about today is the Coal Basin project, and I'm so thrilled that you all showed up for this. This is, I think, probably the most important work our organization has ever engaged in its entire history. What you'll hear from Chris and Mona in a few minutes is a story about an abandoned coal mine with methane leaking on a scale from this coal mine that's the equivalent of or in excess of the totality of all the greenhouse gases in our region. It's really incredible. So the work we're trying to do up there to go up, assess the quantity and quality of methane escaping from this site and develop a plan so we can go up and work to try to destroy that methane is incredibly important for us. As you know, methane gas is what? It's 80 times the potency of carbon dioxide in terms of greenhouse gases. So, and this stuff lingers in the atmosphere for generations. So doing this work now bears fruit for many generations to come. So this is very important work. I'm really thrilled that you're here. We're excited to get your input on this project. And you know, Chris and Mona are the ones with Delta Brick doing the work on the ground. So they know all the details, the ins and outs. CORE is playing the role of being kind of the lead facilitator, coordinating all this work in concert with Chris and Mona. So if you have any questions about that aspect of the work, I'm happy to try to answer them at the end of their comments. But in general, I'm just thrilled that you're here, and it's a pleasure to meet you all. So thank you. Chris?
All right. Yeah, thanks so much, guys. How many of you were at any of the prior meetings that we've had? All right, we got hands up, some hands up. Okay, great. How many of you were not at any prior meeting or how? Okay, we got some new folks. Great. I'm going to give the general intro, which is the same slides that people have seen before, but I'll do that relatively quickly. So if you guys have background questions, please, we'll talk those out and make sure that the full background is understood. And then we'll get to, where's the project's at and a bit more details on what the flow test is going to look like. And the bulk of the time will be questions and answers. So think about questions as we go. And feel free to interrupt me too. It's a small group. We don't have to be too formal. So I'm Chris Caskey. I'm a scientist by background and entrepreneur by trade. I used to be at School of Mines and National Renewable Energy Lab, and I used to be a volunteer board member at the Western Slope Conservation Center, which is a conservation nonprofit just over on the other side of the hill, working in the Gunnison Basin. And Mona Newton is over there. She has public sector and nonprofit experience, working with the Energy Office and CORE, had Dallas's job previously. And we are part of an advisory group, or we are advised by an advisory group. So years ago, 2 years ago, I came to CORE and I said, hey, your guys' mission includes greenhouse gas work. Here's a report from the Colorado Energy Office that says there's a bunch of gas leaking out of Coal Basin. Is this something you guys would like to engage on? They said yes, and we basically went through their Rolodex and which groups ought to be read in on this process and who are the folks that we should be keeping up to date. So you see the list there. I want to be very clear, I do not speak for these organizations. These are just people that I report out to on a regular basis. These are folks that we have every 2 weeks, we just tell them what we're up to and get advice from them. Our goals are to be transparent, forthright, and really community driven. That's why we're here. We want to hear your feedback, and we've heard some of your feedback at previous meetings, which is wonderful. And then of course tackling this large source of climate pollution. So methane is underground in the form of natural gas. It's the main component of natural gas. It leaks out over time. We have gassy geology here, and this photograph is just over the hill in Paonia Reservoir. This is spring ice that's melting out, but this hole was open all winter, and that's because methane bubbles are just coming up from the gassy sediment below the lake. If you rip a huge hole in the mountain in the form of a coal mine, that gas comes out much faster, and it continues to come out long after mines are closed. So, same geology here as over the hill. These are, I don't know how well you can see it, but some infrastructure from the coal mines historically. They mined out about 22 million tons of coal over 50, 80 years, 5 different mines. And I want you to look at this tan curve here. So this is methane that was being released during coal mining. And when the last mine closed in 92, that methane dropped off dramatically and then leveled out and will basically continue to emit forever from a human standpoint. And that's because it's just draining that whole quantity of gas and geology. We're here on the edge of the Piceance Basin. The geology that's outcropped here is exploited for fracking north over in silt and stuff. So all of that gas migrates this direction and comes out, and it'll never go to zero. It's going to stay at this relatively low level, which is still an extremely high level. So I just mentioned the gas-bearing shales. This little cartoon is wildly not to scale, but it is a cross section here across Coal Basin. So here's Coal Basin, bike park here, Huntsman's Ridge there, and there's 2 major coal seams that outcrop. One is at about 10,000 feet and one is at about 10,400 feet, and then those slope down as they go to the west and south. There's also volcanic intrusions came up through, gasified a bunch of the coal, and that's one reason that it's gassy. The other reason is we have those gas-bearing shales, the Mancus shales, which are also super erosive, are the ones that are fracked up north of here. So, the situation is that those 2 coal seams were exploited and dug out. They left some pillars of coal to keep the roof up. There was also a large tunnel called an adit that starts at the lamp house, if anyone's been there, goes a couple miles underground. I got a map here I'll show you, and intersects both those coal seams. So what we have is air sucking in there, picking up a bunch of methane, and then coming out the outcrop. This is a photograph of the concrete header on a portal, and it's been reclaimed by bulldozing earth into it, but they used to drive trucks in underneath there, and now there's just gas blowing out of the small gap between the top of that earth, bottom of that portal. You can see that gas with a methane sensitive camera. I got a video that won't display well on this, but we can see it later. Here's that same portal there, and here's a methane plume coming out there. So, based on reports from the EPA and the Colorado Energy Office, we're expecting over 9,000 tons, almost 10,000 tons of methane to be leaking from this mine complex per year. And that is enough to kill about 14 people per year, or the economics term is cause premature death, but that means kill. And our on-the-ground observations support this number. So we've gone out and we've measured hundreds of tons from that one leak, and then many other smaller leaks that are hard to quantify. But we see what you would expect. If there was 9,000 or 10,000 tons leaking, finding several big leaks and many small leaks is exactly what you would expect. But it doesn't prove it. So I'm a scientist. I gotta tell you exactly what we see. We see supporting information, not proving information. The proving information comes in the form of a flow test, and that's gonna give us some additional benefits as well. And our goals are to be minimally invasive and cause as little disturbance as possible, but at the same time get as much knowledge as we can to help guide decisions going forward and present that information to the community so that you guys can help us as well. So our objective is to do this in spring of 2023. We have submitted a proposal to the Forest Service asking to occupy their surface in order to do this test. And we're currently working on the National Environmental Policy Act compliance that goes with any such proposal. And that is we're attempting to bring a small enough project to the fore that it would fit in under the categorical exclusion pathway within NEPA, which is the one designed for small projects. So we've heard from the community and from the Forest Service and from ourselves being conservationists hiking up there that erosion and water quality are huge issues. You know, Coal Creek contributes a lot of turbidity to the Crystal River, and as we drive on that road, disturb that road, put in culverts and so forth, we're going to see more opportunity for sediment to come off the road into the creek, down into the Crystal, and we've heard that from the community to really minimize that. So we're working on a plan right now that'll keep sediment in place. Going back to that cartoon, our goal is to plug the kind of three zones, the high portals, the low portals, and the adit opening, and to stop that air and methane flow. And then we'll put one pipe into the top mine, one pipe into the lower mine, and see what we get. We'll leave it static and see what the flow is when it's static. We'll pump gently on it and see what the flow is when we're pumping gently on it. And we'll pump harder on it and see what it takes to suck air in all the other gaps and cracks that we didn't get to seal. And we won't be able to seal all of them. Unfortunately, it is impossible to seal well enough that that gas stays underground. That would be my preference. In order to do that, we will need to drive on the road, so passenger vehicles like my Tacoma or Eric's F-350. We will need to put culverts in the various stream crossings. Those of you who've hiked up there, you know there's a couple streams coming across the road. Place culverts in there. We'll need to excavate around the portals, so dig out that earth that's in there, and then reclaim them with better seals. So that's going to look like a brick wall and a foam plug, or in some cases maybe just a foam plug. And we'll need an excavator for that. So driving a small excavator up the road is an activity that we have proposed, and it'll take months to do that work, months to get all our seals in place, and then once that's happened, we'll run the flow test for a matter of weeks. For the reporters in the crowd, I'd be happy to share the slides later. Zooming in on the cartoon, here's what it looks like now. So we've got mine void here, mine void there, various shales and sandstones between. There's a concrete roof on the mine that goes some distance back, and currently there's earth fill there and there. We propose to dig out that earth fill, replace it with some walls. Here's our pipe. Red is flame arrestor, flow test skid, small oxidation device. That just means flame inside a chimney.
Chris,
And
what's the
yes.
scale of the mine void? Is that like as tall as a truck could drive in there?
Yes, so the coal seam was about 10 feet high. And so, then they probably came down 12 inches or so with the roof. So something like 9 to 10 feet. Also, this is also wildly not to scale, because if this is 10 feet here, and then it's 400 feet higher to the next mine void. So I got some maps and some precision, but this is communications. Anyway, so what does this box look like? That might be the next slide. It is. Great news. This is the flow test apparatus, which is called a skid, and it consists of, here's a red for flame arrestor. We got a pump in the background here. Here's a methane analyzer. It's just a laser that's going to shine through that stream of methane and detect how much is in there. And we got controls, and we got a motor running the pump. This big black pipe is in the background, and that blue pump is in the background as well. So this is about a 10,000 pound unit that's there sitting on a trailer, and we're working on what is the lowest impact way to get that up there. It would not be safe to pull this trailer with the road in its current state, and even with some culverts, it's still not going to be safe to pull that trailer. So we might be disassembling it, bringing it up in pieces, that sort of thing. And the Forest Service has requested real specificity on how we're going to do that. So,
Put in a tram.
What about a helicopter?
how about a helicopter is an option. So, since you asked, we talked with several helicopter companies. Only one of them actually gave us a quote, and that company, at this elevation, the time of year we want to do it, they said maximum pickup is 2,000 pounds. So that's, we would love, can you do 4? Because if you could do 4, we could just do this in 3 chunks, and that'd be great. But if we break it down to 2,000 pounds, well, we can just put it in there, except 2,000 pounds at a time, put it in Eric's F-350 and drive it up there. So and in fact, great question for the community. You don't have to answer now, but the impact of helicopter which is gonna have a lot more noise, but be relatively brief, versus the impact of that same number of trips now in a light truck, but that's gonna be more tires on the road, but quieter, but instead of taking an afternoon, maybe it takes 2 days. We'd love to hear from you guys on that trade-off.
Which mine portal is this basically gonna go at?
This is gonna go at the lower mine. Those of you who've been up there and seen the gas blowing out, that's gonna be right in that area. There's a flat area that exists already, and in fact, the next slide is, okay, you guys can't see that at all, I can't see it from here. We have defined a polygon of impact, and I will show you up closer later on. There is a large flat area in place that was where the mine was originally operating, and then the portals go in. There's like 6 portals right down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and something weird here. We'll show you the mine map there, and we got more over there. But the portals go in that way, and they're sloping down. So this is an aerial view from above. And so this polygon is kind of our maximum impact. Our equipment's not going outside that polygon, and in fact, it's going to be just a minority of areas here. But we'll drive up to this red one, we'll dig out, we'll put a wall there. That red one, dig out, put a wall there. Now there's 6 portals, and these 2 are actively blowing out methane, and these 4 are seeping methane. And so if we plug these 2 that are blowing methane, we might get a big puff of dust and then a bunch of methane coming out right there. If that happens, we'll dig that up, we'll put a wall there, we'll put some foam there, rinse and repeat. So, and then this is the upper mine. I'll show you guys that on one of these maps better. So our expected knowledge gain is gas quality and quantity. How much is there? That's that 10,000 tons a year. And then quality, what can we actually do with it? And I just said each seal will help us detect additional leaks. So our 3 options are do nothing, destroy the methane with an oxidizer, or capture the methane and use it for electricity generation. That third one is challenging. But this is the simple decision tree that the flow test will allow us to do. We're basically looking, is the gas we get greater or less than 18% methane by volume? If it is less than that, getting rid of that gas is really expensive. I can go into it, but it becomes a real challenge. Now I expect 30 to 60% gas, which means that a flare is certainly possible. And if we're less than 30% gas, a flare, also known as an oxidizer, is the thing to do. If it is more than 30% gas, we can start talking about electricity generation. And again, there's some challenges here and cost associated with that.
So, wait.
Yes.
Flare. So flare, when we talk about flaring, that's usually a pretty negative environmental impact. Can you
Correct.
describe how this flare and oxidation works?
Yes. So the objective of a flare is to burn the gas. If you're a chemist, which I am, and you don't like the idea of fire on the hill, you might say oxidize the gas, but it means the same thing. So you're taking methane, which is a super potent greenhouse gas, you're burning it, you're releasing CO2, and you're releasing water vapor. And CO2 being 80 some times less potent than methane, that's a trade-off any climate scientist will make. And is that a question? Yes?
Well, the difference to me is it's burned in a flare, which is typically a stack.
Yeah.
The oxidizer is inside a tube, so you don't see a flame. It's being combusted inside that tube, and then it's going up.
That's a guy who knows. Yeah, I try to say oxidizer, but yeah, we're burned. Now we've got 3 options, right? We can leave it as is, we can oxidize it, we can pursue electricity. If we do nothing, the methane release is going to continue. And raise your hand if you're familiar with the concept of social cost of pollutants. Heard it, some have been to this talk before. Basically, there's been an attempt to put an economic value on any pollution. So how many asthma attacks is this causing? How many hospital visits? How many premature deaths? That all gets rolled into something. And the estimates from EPA and others are that these mines are doing about $12 million per year in damage to society. If we put in an oxidizer, costs would be something like $2 million, but the social costs don't go to zero. We are probably not going to catch 100% of that gas, so if we only catch 50%, there's still a $6 million social cost going. If we, let's look at these impacts again. For the flow test, we don't need to fully reopen the road. We do need to drive on it. We do need to put in some culverts. If we're gonna do a project, we need to reopen the road. And that would mean taking a grader and reopening one lane up to the portals. Releasing CO2 as discussed, and then benefits, as you saw a couple slides ago, low quality gas is usable here. For electricity generation, we need mid to high quality gas, which is a challenge. Be great to get some clean electricity for this area, and that would in fact add resilience to this part of the grid. It would be certainly much more expensive, and again, we're still releasing CO2, there's a social cost there. We're not capturing all the methane, there's a social cost there. And not only would we reopen the road, but probably we would bring a pipeline down the road some distance, and so you'd see electrical generating infrastructure and a pipeline either on the road or below the road. And I would ask the community, do you want to see it and have less impact, or do you want me to bury it but then that disturbance of digging occurs? So the next steps are to continue to work with the Forest Service and with the Colorado Oil and Gas Conservation Commission for permits. We have, as I said, submitted a proposal to the Forest Service already, and they've asked for some edits, and so we'll get them the final soon. And then pursuing the NEPA analysis. That was the National Environmental Policy Act. Objective is to do the flow test next spring as soon as the road dries out. And then again, we're going to work with you guys to understand what ought to happen from there. So that's it, and I will take any questions at this time in the back.
So in regards to the electricity produced, would it come down a line down this valley and go or down the Crystal or go over the hill somewhere to connect with?
So currently all of your electricity comes up from Carbondale, and there's a lot of opportunities for that line to get cut by a wildfire or landslide or something. So there is a spur line that goes from the highway up Coal Creek Road and terminates near the parking lot for the bike park. And that is what used to feed the mine. And so it has sufficient capacity that it could run electricity the other direction. And then if there was a failure of the line in from Carbondale, Marble and Redstone would still have that capacity there. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes?
You convert it to electricity, how much like steam and water does that also produce?
Yes.
Could you use that?
Yes.
Pressurize it and power?
Great question. Okay, first and aside, here's the difference between a flare, which is an open flame, and enclosed oxidizers. So these are about 4 feet diameter, 20 feet tall. They're on right now, and if you had a better look at this, you'd see the shimmer of heat there. Now, if we look at electricity generation, this is on a coal mine over in Somerset. They're 3 containerized engines, basically in shipping containers. So, I'm a chemist. There's your chemistry for the day. Methane, CH4, reacting with oxygen, CO2, and water. And yes, you are making steam. We attached a condenser apparatus to one of those generators, and we are cooling the exhaust sufficiently to get the steam to condense and to make liquid water. We were making about 200 gallons a day. There's enough that this project is having some problems, but in theory we capture enough gas that we could be making 6,000 gallons of water a day at that site. And up here, the maximum, if everything worked perfect, we could make 10,000 gallons of water a day or so in Coal Basin. But as I said earlier, we don't expect 100% capture efficiency. So maybe 5,000 gallons of water per day, which is not nothing. We're getting that single digit acre feet per year. You asked, could you compress that and reuse it to squeeze more electricity out? Probably not. These generators operate 40-something% efficient, which is good for generators.
It almost seems like you could just use the gravity itself to sort of like
Yes.
pressurize it, or like bring it down to like create irrigation on like some of the properties here in
Yeah.
Redstone. It would be self-pressurized,
Yeah.
and then they wouldn't have to pay for pumps.
We would love to do, we would love to like make a beaver pond or restore some riparian habitat up there.
Yeah.
I've been told in no uncertain terms that digging beneath the existing Coal Creek Road is not happening. But the other thing that Pickett County is really interested in is there are residential wells in this valley that have junior water rights, and the crystal is oversubscribed. So there is a theoretical future where the I think it's the Colorado River District, but I don't know. Somebody puts a call on the river that basically says turn off your wells, and that's no good for humans. So if there was another 5,000 gallons a day that could be applied to those junior water rights, then they could keep their wells on, and that would be fantastic. Yes, Chuck?
I heard a number at the introduction that has become one of my favorite numbers because it's so misunderstood.
Yeah.
He said that methane is 80 times more destructive than carbon dioxide.
Yeah.
That needs a huge amount of clarification because
Yes.
you try to apply it to where you're going and it doesn't.
Yeah.
Can you fluff that?
And Andrea, I keep not calling on you, but you're next. Yes. So comparing apples to oranges is challenging, and there's many different greenhouse gases. CO2 is the main one. So scientists have chosen to standardize everything to CO2. So the measure you see is 1 ton of methane causes equivalent quantity of warming of 86 tons of CO2. Now, that is on a certain time scale. That is on a 20-year time scale. If you look at 20 years, 1 ton of methane released over the next 20 years will cause 86 times as much warming as 1 ton of CO2. If you take a different time frame, you're going to get a different number. It's basically like comparing how warm is a cotton sheet versus a down comforter. Well, you can do that on one night, but if that down comforter has a hole in it and it loses some feathers every night, then you need a new calculation if you're going to talk years. So over a 100-year time frame, methane is approximately 25 times as potent as CO2, and that's because it turns to CO2 eventually, and then it's not methane anymore. So furthermore, when you oxidize methane, you take 1 molecule of methane, you get 1 molecule of CO2. That molecule of CO2 is actually heavier than the molecule of methane, and because you bolted on those big oxygen atoms. This is the only time you're going to hear an atom described as big. But oxygen is a bigger atom than CO2, you bolt it on there, you got a heavier molecule. So when folks do comparison calculations, it's really important to take all that into account. Is that reasonable?
No, but what you assumed was that there was, for each molecule in our atmosphere of CO2, that you've got a molecule of methane, and that simply, of course, isn't even close to true.
No, so
the density the density of each of the 2 molecules is like different by a factor of almost 100. So that takes the factor of 80 and dilutes it dramatically.
well, so Guys, what Chuck is saying, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that yes, each molecule of methane is way more potent than each molecule of CO2, but there's way more CO2 in the atmosphere.
There you go.
And that's absolutely true. So the atmospheric concentration of CO2 is something like 410 parts per million. For methane, it's like 2 parts per million. So you got a factor of 200 difference.
Yeah.
And however, up there, our choice is, do we want to be releasing methane or do we want to be releasing CO2 is our choice up there. Andrea.
Okay, I have a few questions. I'm not a
Please.
scientist, so and I don't know much about methane, but so you mentioned that even if this situation is managed and is treated, whatever it is, oxidized, that it will still release methane.
Yes.
So what level of methane becomes unhealthy if it still be released? Because you mentioned that at the present levels, it would kill 14 humans, which I don't understand how you come up with that and what
Yeah.
that means. Because how does it affect me and my neighbors on the boulevard?
Yeah.
Is what I'm more interested in. More than 14 humans would potentially die, because I don't get that. But
Yeah.
so you're saying it's going to continue to release methane. So my two-part first question is, what level of methane becomes unhealthy, and as it presently stands, how does it affect the boulevard, for example,
Yes.
residents?
No, great question.
But I have other questions after that.
Yeah. We'll stick with you because you're behind the post.
I know,
So
I'm
yeah.
kind of hiding back.
Yeah, no, you get 5 in a row. So one is what we're looking at is an acute source with very distributed costs. So methane is lighter than air and our mountains are relatively windy. So most of that methane is going up, blowing around, and then just heating the globe writ large. Now some of it is oxidizing and creating smog, and that smog is heavier than air, and so on an inversion type day, that's going to be settling down here and potentially causing respiratory issues. Now, I don't know that that's even detectable. I don't know about any air quality studies around here, but that would be the occasional concern here. But by and large, there's enough wind that's dispersing this pollutant that really where the impact is going to be felt is on people in communities who already have reduced air quality for whatever reason. So that's going to be someone near a highway, someone near a chemical plant, and their air is just marginally worse because of that 2 parts per million methane, which is the whole global mix. That they are then, someone who already has asthma, and now their asthma's taking them to the ER. Someone who already has severe asthma, who's now dying prematurely because of that impact. So how much is too much? I can't answer that. How much do we expect to be able to capture out of here? That's also a trade-off question. So again, we want to be maximizing positive impact while minimizing negative impact. And I'll show you guys this map as well. There's gaps and cracks and methane leaks over a whole 8 square miles. Yeah.
How much
I'll wake
pee?
it back up.
How much pee is too much in the pool?
Yeah.
Let's just get out as much as we can.
Yeah, and so, but I would not propose to go try and plug every little gap and crack, because that would be too much impact on the landscape, too many roads open, etc.
As a
Yes.
follow-up to that first question.
Your next question.
So should there probably be some air monitoring down here? I mean, this sounds very unscientific, with all due respect to how you're
No.
explaining it right now, because you're surmising that it affects, certain areas. We don't really know if it is affecting us or how it's affecting us down here.
Yeah.
So is it possible to get some air quality monitoring in conjunction with the studies you're doing?
Perhaps, yeah. I am not that kind of scientist, so I could look into it for you. And like I said, I don't even know if it would be at a detectable level, but we are near a big source, and typically it's lighter than air, but when it does turn into smog, which is its eventual course, that is heavier than air and could come down. Yeah.
That's number one. Okay, number two.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about sediment coming down the creek. Is sediment unhealthy? I mean, is it potentially toxic, or what is the nature of the sediment that's coming down the
Yeah.
ocean?
So sediment is just dirt, and the Colorado River is named for carrying red dirt, and the Crystal River, however, is named for not carrying dirt. And so the Coal Basin is our biggest exposure in this watershed of Mancos Shale, and Mancos is that highly erosive yellow and black sticky gummy stuff. And so when it rains hard, you get that coming down Coal Creek as you see today. And any disturbance is going to have the possibility of increasing that. So it's not necessarily unhealthy, but it is another one of those things where it's, okay, what are the fish adapted to? And we don't want to push them outside of that range, is how I think of
I
it.
just wasn't sure we mentioned. The other thing is the environmental impact, like on the wildlife and the plant vegetation up there. Is that a factor in all of this, and is it being studied? And
Absolutely, yes. So it's, and Jen, perhaps you could speak to this if you want, but we've submitted a proposal to the Forest Service, and they steward that resource on behalf of the United States. So it's their obligation to look hard at each one of those impacts and then come up with, okay, no, there are no endangered plants, and so it's okay to disturb this area. Hey, we do have elk that give birth up there, so let's avoid calving season, and they'll make those sort of adjustments on behalf of the resource. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that is a good description. I'm Jennifer Schuler. I'm the Deputy Ranger for the Aspen Cypress District, which this particular project is on the district, and I think that you captured that well. We have resource specialists that look at each of the different areas that we manage to see how a potential project might impact the resource and what the environmental effects would be of implementing such a project.
so will you determine like what level is safe for humans and wildlife, and then is that part of the study, and then decide based on that? Like, because it doesn't sound like right now you know what the actual level of the release of the methane level is. Now, I don't know if you said what level is safe and unsafe, but at some point do you try to, determine that level is unsafe up there before you do anything? Or, yeah, that's the part it's a little fuzzy for me.
So the Forest Service, they look at impacts going forward, and I think they look a little bit less at what is the status quo. Is that correct?
Yeah, so we would be looking at the particular impacts of this project, but I think what I hear, the question is, it might be more related to like global emissions of methane.
Yeah.
The difference
Oh,
between
Redstone emissions,
Yeah,
more
so-
actually.
Yeah, and I guess the importance of the project with respect to either local emissions or
Yeah.
global climate change.
So we have found places up at 10,000 feet that are clear no smoking zones, like it will explode if you have a match. We have also found places where it won't explode, but there's enough gas coming out that all of the oxygen has been displaced, and I've hung out there for 10 minutes giving my talk next to the mine portal and got a pretty good headache coming off of that. And that's not toxicity, that's oxygen deprivation. Now there are also toxic gases coming out, so methane itself is not toxic, but some of the higher hydrocarbons as you get up into butane, propane, hexane, those are actually toxic and carcinogenic, and we have seen propane, and we expect to also see hexane and benzene and some of the nastier things. So there's no safe level of those, and they're not great. But to really get them, you gotta go do what I do, which is stand next to the mine portal. Yes, Sarah.
So this has been, these releases of gases has been going on for 100 years, however long these mines have been happening.
Yes.
And so I think that's just to add to the conversation, the scales of time is really important. But so a couple things is to think about is, I know you're an entrepreneur, and I know you're really after this, and it's awesome. And I'm so curious, is anybody else doing this on all these other mines anywhere else in the West or in the East or anywhere in North America? And then second question is, you know, the Colorado, what is it, mining and reclamation, whatever that.
Safety.
That whole organization has a huge history in this basin, and so like, what's their role now?
Yeah.
And then thirdly, like, if this happens, who's the they? Who's gonna do this work, or who's the organization that's gonna be either benefiting, putting the money into it, or making the money from it, or?
Yeah. So, couple part question. This happens a lot. For the first question was where is this happening now? This is currently happening over in Somerset and the Paonia area. There are 3 methane capture facilities on 3 different mines. Those were all the active mines, or at least mines that had permits in place. So they modified their mining permit to do methane capture. That was a clear regulatory pathway to get there. There are also abandoned mines on the East Coast where the resource and the land are privately held, where there's a clear regulatory pathway for capturing and destroying gas. And my company operates a methane destruction facility in Pennsylvania. And however, almost everything with these public land, public mineral resources, abandoned mine that doesn't have a permit associated with it, all of that is totally new. And Jennifer has the probably occasionally intellectually stimulating, but mostly challenging and frustrating task of everything I'm asking to do, not everything, is setting national precedent. Is that correct?
My understanding is that it hasn't, we don't have an instance, at least with coal mine methane on federal surface.
Yeah. And this is not a fair question, but what ratio of that is exciting and interesting to you versus challenging and frustrating?
Depends on the day.
Yeah. Same for me, depends on the day. I'm an entrepreneur. I am running this as a for-profit company, and anytime a for-profit shows up in your town and talks about all the good things you're going to do, you should be suspicious. I am a climate guy by background, and so I approached CORE, and CORE has been funding my work so far and Mona's work so far. They've committed $175,000 total, and we've spent most but not all of that. The federal government did step up with a appropriation in the most recent budget bill of $1.2 million to keep advancing this project, and a lot of that will go towards the actual flow test. And then Pitkin County has committed up to $200,000 to CORE in order to hire folks to do the National Environmental Policy Act work. So there's something called cost recovery. When the Forest Service specialists go out there and look for plants, they will bill me, and I will bill CORE, and CORE will bill the county, and that is how that work will get paid for. We also hired archaeologists who are going to go up there this month to go look at the archaeological resource, and they'll give a report to the Forest Service. So. Now, obviously, if we put in electricity generation, someone would be buying that electricity, and that revenue would come in. And as the project developer, would get some of that. I have proposed that CORE get some of that, and it has been proposed by the advisory group that we also earmark a chunk for continued reclamation up in Coal Basin. So obviously, the part that we disturb, we will put a reclamation bond up such that will get done whether we stay in business or not. But also, we'll put forward annual money to reclaim, do a better job of reclaiming the areas that were insufficiently reclaimed in the past. Does that answer your questions?
Yeah, that's good.
Right. Yes.
With my question, I would like to go back to the beginning of the project.
Yes.
You said we are talking about electricity and that stuff, but we don't know if any of this will even happen.
Yes.
So my question is, you want to or you need to do your measurement first.
Yes.
And my concern is with all the technology which we as a humans are able to use these days, you still have to destroy such a huge amount of nature to be able to measure, only measure, nothing else. You were mentioning the helicopters, which are out of question almost. So what is the other way to have a accurate measurement without dragging your equipment uphill?
Yes. So, great question. The question is, what are other ways we could get some of the same data? And one is we could fly a helicopter around, and I did get a quote to just fly a tight grid over that whole 8 square miles and shine a laser down and see what methane is in the column of that laser. Just like the laser analyzer on that flow test skid, it's just shining light, bouncing back, and it's at a wavelength that methane absorbs, so if it gets more absorbed, there's more methane there. The mines breathe in and out, and so you'd be getting a snapshot. We would aim to fly on a day where they're breathing out so that we could actually see the methane emitting. And then, of course, as you need to extrapolate that against the inhale too, right? So that's decent data. Our quote for that, 95 grand to fly the helicopter, and if you want them on standby so that you can wait for a day when it's actually exhaling, 20 grand a day for standby. So, quite a bit for me, but that is also something that's potentially covered by the appropriation from the federal government. Now, I'm gonna keep talking, sorry. How are we on time, by the way? I've been jabbing up here.
Good. 6:30.
All right. The other possibility is to have a ground-based laser and have it in place for a few weeks and then kind of have it in one point, look up at the circ and just kind of go a few times a day and see what methane plumes you're intersecting. The company that does that is called Long Path. They're out of Boulder or Fort Collins or Longmont or something up there. And they typically monitor oil and gas fields, and so they can find leaks pretty quickly. This terrain is not 100% ideal for them, but that would be great because we could see both the inhale and the exhale. We could do it over a number of weeks with different weather patterns. So if they can actually do it, my preference at this point would be to hire them to do it and actually do it while we're doing the flow test. Because then as we pump, we can see, did we actually turn off leaks? Or did we just pump something that was underground and the leaks continued unabated? So, did that answer your question?
It did a little bit. May I have one more, please?
Yes, you may.
If I understand your numbers, or maybe something what you presented here before, is based on what is happening in Somerset?
Some of what is...
Some of?
Yes.
Yeah. And we know that the coal which is mined in Somerset has a different quality than the coal which was mined here, because it's not that much related, right? The coal has a different quality, has a different usage than the one which is in Somerset. So do you know the amount of methane which is created based on the quality of kind of the coal?
Yes. So the question was, what's the relationship between Somerset and here, and how well do we know our numbers here? So most of my use of Somerset is because there's projects there and we understand how well those projects are working or not working. And it is the same coal in the sense of this whole area was like the Mississippi River Delta 300 million years ago. There was a big river that meandered about. There was weird swamps and giant bugs, and those trees would fall down into the water and eventually turn into coal. And so it was the same swamp here as it was 20, 30 miles away. Our coal, the coal kind of dips down and then comes back up, and they mine it near the surface. But if engineering was not a problem, we could tunnel through the coal from here to there. This coal is a little bit different. It got a little bit hotter. The volcanism was a little bit closer. That's why we have Penny Hot Springs. Mount Sopris is volcanic, and there's on these maps there's underground volcanic intrusions that the miners found as they mined through. So this coal got a little bit hotter. It was a little bit gassier for that reason. Our reports, so that EPA report and the Colorado Energy Office report, those are done by petroleum engineers who have worked in the coal bed methane industry. And basically they took the data that was reported to EPA when the mine was operating, and they applied that decline curve, which is pretty well understood because it's been measured on many, many mines. That decline curve of steep initially and then leveling off and being flat basically forever. They applied that curve to those reported emissions to get the numbers you saw at the start. So those numbers aren't based on Somerset. Now, I asked myself, when the mine was operating, did it have incentive to over-report its methane emissions to the EPA? Probably did not. So we might be extrapolating down from numbers that maybe should be higher.
Oh, I just wanted to follow up and say, like, this is a great opportunity because what we're talking about is not a pristine mountain area. This is a heavily disturbed area. It was only it's not even really fully restored yet. I mean, it was still operational in the 80s. The road beds are still there. So we're not talking about building new road bases.
I bike there every weekend, believe me, I know what I'm talking about.
Oh, I know. I use
Biking
that
is
area.
prohibited some places.
What?
So biking is prohibited some places or up there,
I
just
realize.
so you don't disturb.
I realize that I bike up there. I mean, I run up there a lot too. I mean, it's an amazing area, and it's definitely a trade-off, about the development. But I'm just saying, it's not a wilderness area. It was a heavily mined area. The road bed's there. It's all engineered. The path is there. Also, furthermore, when talking about the effects of this on Redstone residents, the reason Redstone exists is because of all these mines, and the proportion is outsized the effect that the residents have had here historically. Those effects are borne by Pacific Islanders whose islands are disappearing, and so it's just kind of a matter of responsibility, right? And eventually, areas are going to be held accountable for not taking care of this. So it's going to have to be done eventually because it's something we can measure and we're going to have to pay for it.
And it can be an example for other places.
Gentry and Chuck.
So I want to go back to some of your numbers a little bit.
Sure.
You've projected that the mines are emitting close to 10,000 tons annually. I've heard in other presentations that you are not projecting that you would capture that amount of methane a year.
Correct.
I have heard at best 50% of that. What are you looking at capturing? What percentage can you capture? How long should the flow test phase move forward on this project, how long will you be capturing methane in this area? And then I have another one follow-up after that also.
Yeah, so there's kind of three phases, and we've only proposed one so far. So the flow test is a temporary thing where we run it for a couple of weeks, see how it is, and then do reclamation. This 10,000 tons number, that's that's 4 of the 5 mines combined. The 5th mine was not a part of the report for some reason, but it's fine. And no, we don't think we would get all of that. So whenever I'm making a spreadsheet, the highest number I ever assume for capture efficiency is 80%. And there's gonna be a trade-off between, do you wanna go seal another leak, or do you wanna let that one be and not go up there? Now, there's recently an article in the Colorado Sun about sealing up old mine shafts, going in on horseback to wilderness areas and putting foam in holes and liquid expansive foam that hardens up and plugs them. And so that'd be a low impact way to go in potentially. But no matter what you do, 80% is going to be the top. So let's just say we only seal a handful of openings and we're capturing 30%. Okay, the next 4 openings, you need another mile of road. Do we want to go seal those or not? Going from 30% to 50% capture efficiency. Is that trade-off worth it? That's a question for the community. I can kind of outline, and I just made up those numbers right now. I can kind of outline what I think those, each steps would be, and you get diminishing marginal returns, right? Going from 70% to 80% is harder than going from 60 to 70% in terms of impact and sealing. So 50% capture efficiency, I think, is totally reasonable for the 2 big mines and just sealing the locations identified in the flow test. And Chuck.
Oh, and then so
Yeah.
how, should you move forward with the project, how long will you be capturing methane in that area?
Yeah, so if we actually did a project, if we said the flow test looks like we should do a project, then you saw that decline curve, the methane's just gonna keep coming out. So 20 years is a reasonable time frame for that's how long equipment lasts. And if you're still capturing a lot of gas at 20 years, you have a question of, do you get new equipment, or do you go ahead and say, you know what, it's really declined a lot. We'd rather do reclamation and let a little bit of methane keep coming out. So it's definitely a long-term thing. Yeah.
And then one more, if you don't mind, Chuck.
I could do that.
Okay. So Coal Basin has already undergone a 30-year reclamation process.
Yes. Thanks in part to many people here.
Certainly.
Yeah.
And a very difficult process on top of that. With the closing of the mines, we know that the Mako shell is pretty detrimental to our fish wildlife. And not talking only about water quality, vegetation has been very difficult to reclaim. It's still struggling. We also have a dwindling elk herd in that area,
Yeah.
which noise is something that they are very sensitive to.
Yeah.
Not only would the flow space have some sort of impact, and
Yeah.
certainly noise disturbance.
Yeah.
What is the noise disturbance should you move forward with either oxidization or electric generation, and is this project going to kill this elk herd?
So the last question, it will not kill the elk herd. The generators over in Somerset, some folks have been on a tour of those. Those are just big engines, they're V16s. The project was designed when the mine was operating. They're loud, it's unpleasant to be there. It's in a creek called Elk Creek, and elk still come past it, but they're certainly not happy about that. There are whisper quiet generators, that's a different technology called fuel cells, that are a possibility, more expensive of course. If we were doing oxidation, the loudest thing would be the pump. And the pump would go in a little insulated shed. The oxidizer itself, you can stand, it could be between you and I, and we could still hear each other. So that one's quite quiet. And we'd be servicing it. They're remotely operated, so once it was working and stopped having startup problems, it would be, you'd send a technician up every month or 2. Does that answer your questions?
I think so.
You could also pull the cattle out of there.
Well, I don't suggest that because politics. Yes, Chuck.
Okay, you have focused on the first phase, which is to determine the flow rate and the quality. And I think that environmental impact of that is modest and it can be rehabilitated pretty straightforwardly.
Yeah.
But the second phase, which is when you bring in things that aren't there now and will be in for decades, that the environmental impact on Coal Basin will be significant if the capture and destroy mission that you have proposed goes to fruition and using on-site diesel engines to generate megawatts of electricity is going to change Coal Basin in a way that none of us have seen since it was in the mining era. That's not what the residents here want to see up there.
Thank you for that.
So
Yeah.
maybe it'd be a
Heard you.
good idea for you to tell us about just what will the new equipment that will have to be installed up there in order to make this thing work?
Yeah, so question was about equipment. If we do oxidation, we're gonna have a pump in a noise insulated shed, and that pump would be driven by the methane that it's pulling up. Then that goes to a oxidizer. The oxidizer is pretty quiet. If we pursue generating electricity, you got two options: the super quiet option, which is fuel cells, and the relatively loud option, which is those internal combustion engines. And they're analogous to diesel engines. They're burning methane, they're not burning diesel. And those themselves could be within a noise insulated enclosure and mufflers on them. So the impact to something like the bike park and the elk herds could be relatively minimal. I worked some on fuel cells in graduate school and think they're really cool, so I would want the fuel cells, but they do cost several million more. But that would be, that's kind of, again, a future question, and I'm hearing people have noise concerns, so that would be, I could go out there and raise that money if we wanted to, if electricity seemed like the way and we wanted the really quiet electricity.
An idea of the scale of this thing,
Yeah.
is this something the size of
So
a basketball court, literally, or is it bigger?
you're talking flare or electricity generation?
Well,
We do both.
I have heard you say your strong preference is the electrical, and I understand, of course, if it's gonna make money, that's a big driver, admittedly.
Yeah. Well, it's
So let's focus on that one.
sure.
It's probably the worst case.
So I've told the advisory group that based on how this project is performing in Somerset, that we shouldn't pursue electricity generation, or it should be our second choice probably, just because it's hard. So this site here is 7/10 of an acre, and it has a storage shed, 2 control buildings, and 3 shipping container sized boxes that have engines in them. So that's a person-sized door right there, and there's an engine sitting in that. This is about the size of what you would expect if you did electricity generation here. Thanks, yeah, that's fairly visible. And this, you can ignore this. So that's an oxidizer that was installed when the mine was operating and when it was making a huge amount of methane, but that no longer runs anymore because we're down on the decline curve now, and we're just running these engines when we can.
So how many diesel engines and generators packages would you need,
So this makes 3 megawatts,
right?
and these mines, the Colorado Energy Office report says you can make between 5 and 6 megawatts if you had 100% capture efficiency, which as discussed, we won't. So something like, start with 1 or 2 megawatts, see how it goes, add a third if the gas is still coming a few years later.
And these go 24 hours a day.
These, I mean, they should. These ones don't, because we got a leak in the mine and we're sucking air in and the quality goes down and then we have to turn the engines off. But yes, real challenge as Holy Cross Energy is switching to 100% renewables is wind's not always blowing, sun's not always shining. So to have a resource that can be either on demand or running 24/7 that is an environmentally beneficial resource is something that would be great for the grid. Now, the humans and the grid are a different thing, and that's why we're here to talk about it.
So just to add some more perspective, this is U.S. Forest Service land, and the minerals are managed by the Bureau of Land Management, and these are the commons of all people and all voters in America, all citizens, not just the lucky few that get to live in this Roaring Fork watershed or visit this place. And also, Coal Basin, we know, is from all the watershed studies that have happened over a very long time, this is one of the worst water quality places in the entire area because of this unbelievable amount of mining and degradation of the land. And the state tried to clean it up, but didn't have enough funding to do it. There's been never-ending projects up there between cow stumps and using biochar to improve the soil and all this, and the amount of impact that we have by degrading this place over 100 and however many years it's been, has created so much greenhouse gases and so much impact that, oh my gosh, what if this project could actually contribute to the good as opposed to the negative? And what if it puts Redstone on the map as these people are rocking the boat and doing something that nobody else has done, and we want to come learn about it, and we want to celebrate it, and we want to we think this is the coolest thing in the world, because it could be a model for so many places and really give something more for this valley to celebrate. And so and it's not just about us in this community, again, because these are the commons, and the air, like you said, goes way into the atmosphere and is for the whole planet. And we should be really excited about that, I think, as a community, in a time when there's so many things to be down and out about and frustrated by. Here's an opportunity to rally behind something that could actually really be something that we could really put ourselves on the map if we aren't already. So.
With that being said, is the categorical exclusion the best way to proceed here? This is a project that is putting us on the map. I mean, maybe we should be looking at an environmental assessment or something a little more in depth. And also, as a follow-up to that, if you go to the flare stage or the electrical generation stage, are you also going to be asking for a categorical exclusion at that point? Or are we going to actually have a study and an assessment that can better tell us what's happening? Because I just hear a bunch of questions and no studies happening.
Yeah.
And you're asking to skip the study, so.
Well, the flow test is the study,
But not the environmental study.
Yeah. So categorical exclusion is the process within the Environmental Policy Act for relatively small projects. And it does have environmental review, it will have public comment, and you'll get to see the report from the plant specialist and the archaeologist and the sediment control hydrologist person. That's all going to be done, it's all going to be compiled, and it's all going to be paid for by the county, so thanks county taxpayers. And that is not something that you can all review and then send comments to Jennifer. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I can speak to this a little bit. As I hear what you're saying as far as, there's different phases to this project, and Chris mentioned earlier that they had requested a categorical exclusion. This is something that the Forest Service, we would determine whether a categorical exclusion is appropriate for the work that's being proposed. So, if a proponent comes in and says I'd like a CADX, that's not something we're like, oh, okay, let's do that because you asked. It's what is the work that's being proposed, and is it appropriate to use a categorical exclusion to do the environmental analysis for that project? And as Chris mentioned, categorical exclusions are established for every federal agency, and it's basically looking at similar types of impacts across different categories. So there's a couple that we, the Forest Service, are looking at for just the pilot phase of this project. where it would, be minimal disturbance, to the road, and then also looking at, opening up those mine portals. So, as Chris mentioned, we do have analysis that happens under categorical exclusion. There are 7 different factors that we need to look at, and I'm not going to be able to remember them all here, but it ranges from that heritage cultural piece to water, wildlife, endangered species. Those sorts of topics fall under those 7 categories, and if any of those aren't met, then we cannot use a categorical exclusion for that type of project. Because this project is phased and the end result is based upon what they would find in the pilot project, we could use categorical exclusion for this first phase, and then if it was broadened in the future, then we would look at what would be appropriate based on what's proposed in the future. So that might be something more than a categorical exclusion, like an environmental assessment or environmental impact statement, but that would be based upon what is proposed at that time. Just based on, what we've heard so far, it's likely that it would not be a categorical exclusion in the future, but it would wholeheartedly depend upon what that proposal looked like. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfectly,
Okay.
thank you.
Yeah.
And I'll add color to that to say there's basically no chance of a categorical exclusion for a implementation phase project, be it flares or electricity generation. And the environmental groups that are in the advisory group, they're like, oh, it's full EIS, we're going big. So that's their expectation based on how they've seen the flares, and they've said EIS. But it's Jennifer's choice, not mine nor theirs. Yes,
and Chris,
sir.
if I could just follow up on the comment process, we don't always have to have a comment from the public. It's up to line officer discretion, so the ranger's discretion on whether we do public comment on categorical exclusions. Kevin Warner is the district ranger, and he said that we will be having public comment on this categorical exclusion. So we'll put that out to the public so that folks can see what we've done, and we'll ask for comment on it at that time. So that'll be up for review.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So basically for phase 1, we have to reopen a road to get up there, correct?
We have to drive on a road, and we have to improve some of the water crossings.
Right. So
But
basically,
we don't need to regrade the road.
initial, we're gonna rebuild the road. And I'm guessing you guys go to one mine, 'cause you said one portal's at this level, the next one's 400 feet up. I'm guessing you're going to portal 1, portal 2.
Yep.
Up on by the cement block.
Yep.
So that's one road you gotta build in there to do your assessments and figure that out. Then after that, if you have to go plug number 3 mine, you have to go all the way back down to the lamp house and build another road all the way back up to 3 mine, 5 mine, and 4 mine. They're all different roads. So let's say it's working out for us and everything. You guys go to oxidation phase, and you said you need to be able to have the roads open to maintain. So now, from now on, these roads are fully maintained for the next 10, 20 years, or until, your assessment's done, which could be if it's working out. How are you guys planning on keeping those roads closed down to already bicycle traffic, vehicles, stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a real concern. So the question was, and if you look at the map, you got all these different mines across the arc of the basin, and they have different roads going to them. And I propose reopening a road that goes to 1 mine and 2 mine, Dutch Creek 1 and 2, and those are sitting on top of each other. So as you identified, one road up and then another segment from there connecting them. And if we were to do other projects, those would be separately proposed and separately evaluated. And the 4 mine is specifically the one that's not in any of the studies. We believe it to be flooded. I've spent a little bit of time up there looking for methane and haven't found anything. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but unlikely I'll ever propose anything up there. 3 mine is connected underground with 1 mine, and so we could hopefully not reopen a road if we were to tie those together. Maybe we just plug the surface via some ATVs and some horses, and that methane is going to flow up to our capture system. 5 Mine I've been to, I have not been to, Mona's been to 5 Mine, and that's the least gassy, the oldest, the smallest, and the least gassy, so it feels like high hanging fruit in terms of impact versus benefit. Does that answer questions?
Yeah, and then the other thing is, you guys' plan for when, if this goes through, where you're gonna park your equipment, is it gonna be at the trailhead, is it gonna be up on the, Coal Basin Ranch area? Impacts for, like me as the outfitter, to get my vehicles in, with a bunch of construction equipment, riding horses and stuff like that up there. What you guys' plan to reduce impacts for the bicycle park, my stuff, and public usage?
Yeah, absolutely, and that is something we would come to you and be like, here's the map, here's our stuff as little toys, let's like push it around and see which scenario works. Yeah, but more likely so something like oxidizers are more likely, those would be up high, construction equipment would be staged down low during that phase, and whether that's near the lamp house or near the trailhead or on Forest Service land down farther is to be determined.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about the winters? We're talking about kind of reasonable
Yes.
environment.
Yes.
Winters are pretty tough, right? How are you going to maintain?
Yes. Yes, the oxidizers can continue to run in the winter, and we would, so this has not yet been proposed, but if we were to do something like oxidizers, we would need to service them occasionally in the winter, and I would propose doing that with over snow vehicles. And since I'm a cross-country skier, I would maybe tow some grooming equipment or something. I propose that, and then the impact to the other values like wildlife would be evaluated by the public and the Forest Service, and we'd go from there. But over snow vehicles would be my response for winter. Yes, Gentry.
There's a current study that's happening in Coal Basin for methane,
Yes.
and they are not reopening the road.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about your flow testing phase and why you would need to make the impacts that you are?
Yes. So there's a scientist from Colorado State University that's been hired by Katina Foundation to do some methane surveys up there. And he will, if his stuff goes well, he'll get a total tons per year coming out. He will not get any quality information because he'll just be monitoring it at the surface. And that methane's coming up through a bunch of coarse rock, the mine's breathing in and out. There's a whole lot of air mixing with the methane as it's coming out. So once it's hit the surface, it's very low quality. It's well below that 18%, which is the threshold for can you destroy it. So what the flow test will be answering that the studies I've done to date have not, and that the helicopter-based survey would not, and that the CSU survey will not, is what is the quality of the gas behind that rock rubble pile, and is it something that can be readily destroyed with an oxidizer? That's what we're going for. Mac, did you have
Yeah, I was just gonna ask, what are the major changes in your strategy that have happened from the first update that we did? I wanna say it was maybe toward the end of May or so, just going by memory. And of those changes, what opened up the door for a categorical exclusion?
Well, so one, I think that categorical exclusion is maybe misnamed because it's not excluding the process from environmental review. It's merely excluding it from those two larger environmental assessment and environmental impact statement. We have sought to keep the project small because we want to do it soon. We consider it to be a climate emergency, and we'd like to run the flow test and see if we can destroy this methane or not. And so it takes a Forest Service something like 8 or 12 months to do the level of review necessary for a categorical exclusion, so we wanted to be in that range rather than the 2 to 3 to 5 years for the bigger things. When I first proposed something to the Forest Service, it was, let's reopen the road, let's actually use a grader and make it nice and smooth all the way up there so that we can bring in a concrete truck or something. And that's, one, we heard from the community that was not gonna be viable from an impact to knowledge trade-off standpoint, that was not viable. And also that looked like a larger environmental review that would take multiple years. And so we scaled that back. We said it's either gonna be helicopter or disassemble and carry the equipment up in phases. I felt like you had a multi-part question. Did I answer?
I was
some
just
of it?
kind of wanted to highlight, yeah, some of those changes from the very first time we did an update to today, and I think that does,
Yeah.
you know, cover some of the, I think, for instance, when I hiked up with you and actually saw the road, like that really clicked with me that, oh, this is not dragging a bulldozer up an entire road, right?
Yeah.
And to me, that was a major development, just exactly what you're talking about. And I viewed that categorical exclusion as a sign that this was a less harmfully impactful project. And so I was just curious what led to that. And I think you captured it pretty well with those changes in your strategy.
Yeah. And,
If I can add.
yes, please.
also. And so I think the other piece to add is it's about timing. And that is to let you all know, obviously, we were optimistically hoping to try and do something this summer. Didn't happen, we're into fall, it's starting to snow. But just to let you know that we'll be working over the winter with Forest Service and consultants to hopefully get a permit by spring so that we could conduct a flow test. Now that's, you know, optimism. There's a lot of pieces that have to fall into place in order to even make that happen, but just we want to keep everybody apprised of what the time frame and the timeline looks like. So.
Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions. One is, what's the state of the portals at this point? Are they closed in entirely? Was that part of mitigation?
Yeah, the portals have been reclaimed by bulldozing earth into them. Some of that earth has settled, and so there's two portals that have a gap between the top of the earth and the bottom of the portal. And then there's other portals that are covered and not currently visible, but you can find where they are with the methane detector. So they're still there, and if you get that earth out, you could probably walk for miles underground.
So in regard to air monitoring in Redstone, is there room for citizen science to do some types of monitoring to see what the air qualities are at different times in Redstone?
Certainly could be, yeah. I have a friend who is also a volunteer at the Western Slope Conservation Center who's done some of that citizen science, and I'll look into it. I got a card, we should be in touch. Yeah, I got anyone who wants to email me, I got cards, we'll be in touch. Happy to field more questions and so forth. Yes.
Hi, I just wanted to speak to a couple of points that were made. My name's Trina, I'm the manager of Coal Basin Ranch, which is the bike park that Chris has referred to a couple of times. And the ranch is actually held by the Katina Foundation, funding the CSU research that Chris mentioned. One point I wanted to just make a little bit of correction. I'm not sure that the water quality comment, we have been sampling water that is on our property, but as well as Coal Creek and Dutch Creek, just in that zone. I can't speak to Forest Service or county areas, but I would not describe it as some of the worst in the area. The sampling is coming back from a professional water engineer that is in Carbondale, and it is clean. There's nothing alarming or
And I was speaking to sediment loads. That's
I
what
thought you mentioned
that
the
is
coal mine.
that is
Like,
water
You
quality.
had mentioned that what was going on in the coal mine was an
No, I
operation.
meant that whole basin is one of the biggest watershed issues in the entire
Okay,
watershed.
well, I think a lot of the restoration efforts that have taken place, or sort of speak to some of the positive water quality that's occurring. Then the other quick thing I would just note that the foundation really wanted to understand what is naturally occurring right now in terms of the methane and the methane footprint. So, being asked to use the lamp house, which is on that parcel of private property. We just need to do that due diligence. We want to collaborate and cooperate as much as we can to understand, but we also have to do that due diligence and try to understand what is currently occurring and naturally being emitted. And that is the goal of some of that work that CSU is doing, rather than basing it on when the mine was active, which we don't know, we didn't know of any other current studies being done on that. So that is the goal of that work. It's not to go against, we're not taking a position at all. It's not our role or our hope to take a position for or against a project. We're simply just trying to understand what is naturally occurring today, in today's time, to help make better decisions as a landowner. So just a couple quick clarifications there.
Thank you, Trina. We're about at time. I'm happy to stick around for anything further, but final thoughts from anyone?
Please have some food on your way out. If you need some